This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Within myself, I discovered like a pretty deep tension inside of me. And it felt kind of like a black cancer. That's how I describe it.
Father Barron was telling us a story about how his grandfather was a Freemason. Right? And you're thinking, well, what's wrong with that? I just saw this piece. There's a new document out from the Vatican. They make it very clear there's no room for doubt. You cannot be a good Catholic and a member of the Masons at the same time. So what happens at the higher levels of Freemasonry? At the lower levels, it's pretty innocent, right? At the higher levels, in some of the ceremonies, is what they're involved with occultic? You know, is there a darkness to it? There was a bishop from the Philippines. He asked a dicastery for the doctrine of faith about this issue because apparently he's got a large number of Catholics in his diocese who are joining Masonic lodges. There's an issue he's having in response, and the Vatican pointed him in the declaration they made back in 1983. That declaration, you can go back and you can look it up as well. Just go to the Vatican's website. But it says that Catholics who are members of Masonic lodges are in a state of grave sin. That's what it says. So the Masons, of course, they try to portray themselves as a force for good in the world, right? And I think there's a lot of people who are very innocent about it. I think they are getting into this because I think it's great. You see the guys in fezzes walking around at the local parades, collecting money for Children's Hospital. It seems good. But the fact is, Masonry is opposed to Christianity. It's in opposition to it. It believes it's something that surpasses, rise above all religions. Since it transcends religions, it is what can really unite the world. That's the philosophy. That's exactly where we differ. The only thing that can unite the world is one thing, and he's a person, and that person is Jesus Christ. And for Masons to claim that Masonry transcends God himself, well, you can see why. The church is very clear on this. I'm joined right now by Father Mark Barron to give us a little clarity on this issue. Maybe you've got somebody who is a Freemason. Maybe you are. Feel free to join us. The number here is 888-914-9149, 888-914-9149. Father, good to have you back. Good afternoon.
Hey, great to be back on the show, Drew.
Yeah, it's always good to talk with you. You know, I when you talk about Freemasonry, I think about some of these conspiracy theories. You know, you look at Masonic plots against the church. You know, maybe their outsized influence on the culture or politics. There's a couple of Disney films, about 10 years ago, starring Nicolas Cage about. They portrayed the Masons as good guys, and they were hoarding treasure and all sorts of stuff. And then you got Dan Brown's novel, but the influence outside of all of that entertainment is really quite spiritual, right? Fill us in. What's the church teach? Is there any innocence in this, or getting involved, does it lead you into a pretty dark place?
Yeah. So the church has written formally against Masonry since the 18th century, so about the early 1700s. And since that time, she's written like 23 different letters that condemn Masonry outright. And so, some of them were more lengthy and more descriptive of the problems with Freemasonry. The main problem with Freemasonry is that it basically rejects supernatural revelation and promotes rather a naturalistic religion. And they do this under the guise of, because Freemasonry, as I understand it, and I've read about it, kind of morphed from more of involved in like construction type stuff, building type stuff in the Middle Ages. And then it morphed into what they call more of a speculative Masonry, which involved ideas. Well, the goal of it was to unite people, because at the time, you're coming out of the Protestant Reformation, so you have all these wars of religion, Christians against Christians. So anyway, you have all these different religious beliefs, and so Masonry was trying to unite man in a general sense under this kind of one religion known as Freemasonry. And so in order to do that, they went against any type of religion that tried to claim any type of dogmatic pronouncements. So the Catholic Church would be a big enemy at that, because of our doctrine. So anyway, long story short, they had to then obviously water down the supernatural revelation of Christianity, so they could water down the Bible, water down the church and the papacy, so they can try to form this really humanistic religion around the notion that there was no divine revelation and everything is based on reason. That's kind of like, reason replaces God. It's kind of like the Enlightenment in the French Revolution, the age of reason. And so that's pretty much what you have there in terms of the problem with its basic principles. And then when you brought up the occult, and the occult comes into play because Masonry uses a lot of symbols, and it uses a lot of symbols rooted in the ancient Egyptian religion and also their occult understanding of the ancient symbols used in ancient Egypt and then the occult meaning of those things. So, yes, so it does have that kind of diabolical. So it's diabolical on two levels. From a principle standpoint, completely against God and his revelation and all that flows from that.
Right.
And then also just from from an occult standpoint with espousing ancient Egypt principles.
My concern with it is it said that Freemasons, they take oaths that can incur curses, on them all the way, to the fourth generation. You have a very interesting story. Your own grandfather was a Mason, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He made it to the top. He was a 33rd degree. So
tell us his story, right? And what happens? I mean, like I said, those lower levels, they seem like they're doing great work. Your thoughts on that? Maybe share your story.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I never met my grandfather because he had a lot of problems. He was actually raised in a Masonic orphanage, or was given by his parents to a Masonic orphanage because they couldn't raise him anymore. Mm-hmm. And I believe he was abused there within that orphanage. So anyway, but he ended up getting into Masonry himself and becoming a third degree Mason. Like I said, I never met him. So I'll fast forward to my time. I'm in the seminary. You start to pay attention more to your interior life. And as I paid attention to my interior life, I felt like there was some kind of like black cancer inside of me. Wow. Like it was a tension that reflected the black cancer. Wow. So long story short, after I was ordained to the priesthood, I was living in Steubenville, Ohio, because we have a house of formation there. And my mom came to visit me. So I brought her up to this one Protestant woman to do some healing prayer. And she saw that she had some Masonry, and, her dad was a Mason. So she's like, oh, you need to pray this prayer and have Mark come in and pray it with you. It was a prayer about deliverance of descendants of Freemasons. So I never heard of this. So I'm like, okay, why not? So I go in and I pray this prayer, and it took me 30 minutes to pray it. And I'm like, man, I'm dying when I'm praying. It's like, man, this is really tedious. But when I get done with it, I literally felt like a straitjacket being taken off my soul. Like literally, I was like breathing free air. And as I expressed what I was experiencing, this woman in the room was like, I guess she had some kind of ability, like a spiritual X-ray vision, I call it. She just said, yeah, as you were praying that prayer and renouncing all this stuff, I saw spirits leaving you left and right. And I'm like, okay, well, I never really thought that about myself, but, right. I'm like, oh, it kind of makes sense because the healing the family tree stuff is real. And I think it was an exorcist say that he said that if a person joins the Masons, they basically give their family tree line over to Satan. Yeah. Yep. And so anyway, I took this prayer. Somebody was coming to me for spiritual direction, and I knew that they had Masonry on both sides of the family. Right. And so we prayed that prayer, and then this person said immediately afterwards, thank you for having me pray this prayer, because he's like, I was really struggling with suicidal ideation before I was coming here. Wow. And he's like, it's gone. It's gone.
As you point out, I mean, when you take these oaths, when your grandfather reached that highest level, and if this stuff does ripple down the family line, the devil respects, he takes advantage of that natural authority structure that God has given us through the family. So there is the principle of redundancy in the order of grace, where grace kind of flows downhill. Well, so does sin. And this works in natural authority structures such as the family. So, the devil's a legalist. And when somebody swears an oath, the devil claims a right, and that claim has to be broken. And apparently that was the case. I know that you have often offered people a particular resource that can really help them break these generational chains or this proclivity or this attachment to Freemasonry. Yeah, absolutely. So if the best way to do it is to write down this phrase, prayer of deliverance for descendants of Freemasons. So it's prayer of deliverance
for descendants of Freemasons. Type that into the Google search, and you'll see the prayer will come up. If it's a short prayer, you want the long one, because you got to go through and renounce all the stuff there, from all the various degrees and things like that. And so it should be a pretty lengthy prayer, and that's the one you want to pray.
Right.
And it would be good to pray with somebody else, pray it out loud. If you can pray it with a priest, that'd be great, but it's not necessary. But definitely just, if you are a descendant of Freemasonry and you haven't prayed this prayer, pray it, and it might be helpful for your life.
Hey, like what you just heard? Then share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.